Hello, everybody. Welcome to this rather experimental live stream of The Guardian Upside. What we hope will be the first of many, but I guess that really rather depends on whether it's any good or not. I'm Mark Rice-Oxley. I'm the Guardian editor and journalist. I'm the head of our supporter membership program at the moment. I'm a bit of a jack of all trades, really, and I'm certainly not a master of this. So please bear with me as I take us through the next hour or so. Our quest, as ever, on the upside is for hope, potential, ideas, solutions, anything really that can give us a dose of optimism in an age that I'm sure many of you out there will be feeling is one of the most challenging that we've ever faced. Now, before we get going, just a few words on how this is going to work. I'm going to start off by having a conversation with our guest for about half an hour. And after that, we'll be open for your questions. Now, many of you have sent in some questions already, and I'm very grateful for those. For the rest of you who want to get in touch, there's a button you can use on the right-hand side of your screen, which is marked Q&A, and you can send in your points or questions anonymously if you like, or you can be named. You can direct your question to our guest, or if you're really desperate, to me, and we'll try and get through as many as we can in the time permitted. Huge apologies if we can't answer every question, because there are hundreds of you out there today. But if we don't, you'll just have to write to us at theupside@theguardian.com. We do endeavour to answer everything that comes through to us on that channel. We'll be going on till about 2 p.m. Of course, you can leave early if you like, but only if you have a very good reason, a doctor's note, or maybe a letter from your parents, something like that. Now, before I introduce our guest, just a quick word about the upside. Many of you, I think, will be familiar with this stream of Guardian journalism, but for those who aren't, we launched it in 2018. It was an attempt to sort of balance out a lot of the gravity and overwhelming earnestness of the news offering. It's an attempt to try and highlight the endeavours and innovations and movements and individuals out there who are trying to face up to and solve the world's biggest problems. And the idea is that by investigating properly and examining the things that work and reporting on that, we can help to spread best practice around the world, and our journalism can have some real impact in that way. Now, just to be clear, this is not sort of those "and finally" items at the end of news broadcasts. It's not stories about animals doing funny things or children picking their nose, stuff like that. You can find that elsewhere on the internet. This is rigorous reporting. We've covered everything from technology to demography, ecology, psychology, anything ending with ology, really. And now, of course, we're faced with epidemiology in the form of COVID-19. And I found it deeply paradoxical that one of the most daunting things that's ever happened to us has sparked an extraordinary wave of solutions journalism, not just at The Guardian, but pretty much everywhere around the world. In my newspaper, we've looked at sort of the international examples that countries like South Korea and Germany and New Zealand have given us. We've looked at heroism and the dedication of our healthcare workers who've been such an inspiration to all of us. We've looked at science and medical treatments that are coming down the pipeline, the vaccines and the drug remdesivir, which this week looked like it might be quite a promising treatment for patients of this illness. We've looked at the surge of neighbourliness and community values that have really knitted our society together better than I think I've ever experienced in my life. And we've looked at the surprising consequences of COVID-19 on our natural world, the way that wildlife has rebounded and things like pollution and carbon emissions have fallen dramatically. But I think despite all that, it's fair to say that A lot of you and a lot of our audiences will be feeling deep uncertainty, anxiety, the way that lives have been upended. And that seems to me to be a very good moment to introduce our guest to you today. Mo Gawdat is an innovator. He's an engineer and an entrepreneur. He's the former chief business officer for Google X. But for me, much more than that, he's a philosopher in my view. He's a thinker about nebulous qualities like satisfaction, disappointment, and what it is to be happy. His 2017 book, Solve for Happy, which was dedicated to his son Ali, who sadly passed away in 2014, for me it's a classic of the genre. It makes him the perfect guest for our inaugural Upside live stream event. So Mo, welcome to the Upside.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be the opening act. I hope I'll do a good job so that we can keep this going. It's an incredible effort.
I'd like to start by asking you a fairly simple question. How have you been? How have you been surviving lockdown?
Thank you for asking. How have I been? Like everyone else, there are good moments, difficult moments. There is loss, but there is gain. There is a lot of uncertainty, but there is also a lot of certainty, surprisingly. And I have to admit, it's been sort of the mix between being responsible and mindful and doing the right thing to be safe for myself and my family, but also not be the reason for unsafety for others on one side, but also the sort of the kick from life to sit down, meet myself, which I normally do very frequently, but recently I've been just dragged into the pace of life so quickly. And this opportunity has really been an incredible reflection opportunity for me. I managed to find time to correct a lot of my path, if you want, to reflect on a lot that I needed to work on. And it definitely has been a rewarding opportunity for me in a way on that front, for sure.
I think a lot of us have found it a kind of bittersweet passage of time. For me personally, it's been a busy time, but it's also been a time when I have been at home an awful lot more than usual. I spent more time with my family, in my garden. Things seem to be growing. And then this week, a very close family friend died, and I was reminded of the seriousness of the situation. So we're sort of juggling two really competing emotions.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. I know there is a lot of sadness, a lot of loss, a lot of us are going through this not knowing what will happen next. But I think it's important to understand a few things. One is to understand that life, the game of life, if you want, is not at all a game of control. What we're going through with COVID-19 is not unlike what we went through every day when we crossed the streets or took trains or went on a motorcycle to work or whatever. Life, by definition, is a game that is designed around uncertainty. It is designed around loss of control, and it also, unfortunately and sadly, and I only allow myself to say that because of my personal story of losing my son so unexpectedly due to human error. Death is just part of life, and in an interesting way, I think we tend to forget that. We tend to forget that as a species, we lose 73 million people every year. This is the mortality rate for 7+ billion people to have a life expectancy of 70 years, on average, or 60 some years on average, depending on where you live in the world. It basically means that we will eventually die. And I don't undermine the value of one single life at all, especially if it's the life of a friend or a son or a loved one. But the reality is COVID-19 took in its entirety so far 200,000 lives, 200 and some, right? In comparison to the big picture, I think we're suffering a little bit from an attention bias. We're suffering from the spotlight that makes us recognize when one of our friends suffers this, okay? On top of what's in the media around others that suffer that, and the prime minister suffering this, and so on and so forth. And our brains would build a picture that makes this bigger than what it actually is, okay? The truth and the reality, unfortunately, is the game we've signed up for, the game of life, is not, one of those games where you're just going to start the game and push the controller forward and wait 70 years. That's not how it's played. Unfortunately, the game of life is played in a way where there are sometimes losses, there are sometimes challenges, there are sometimes, harshness. And the trick, if you want, is how do we play? How do we engage? How do we handle those things in a way that doesn't make them any easier, sadly, but makes us more resilient and more capable of dealing with?
Do you think this idea of control is become a millstone around our necks in sort of the early 21st century? Perhaps 50, 60 years ago, people were less certain of the trajectory of their lives and less clear on how much of their lives they actually control. But now we're very sort of superhuman in a way, and feel we control everything. And so something like this comes as an even bigger shock to us.
You're spot on, Mark. I think the truth is control is an illusion that's built by the Industrial Revolution, and the idea that we are paid through our lives to control events for specific outcomes. You as an editor, you have to get something out exactly on time, and you get really good at it, and it's very high quality, and you do it over and over and over, and you start to believe that every time you will want to do that, it will happen. And in the process, you also start to believe that you can, stay healthy all the time, that you can, could tell your daughter what to do or your son what to do, and they'll do it. And that's really, really an illusion. If you think about it, the truth about control is that we have none of it at all. As a matter of fact, that the purity of physics, at the very core of physics, is chaos theory, is entropy. And entropy is really a very simple mathematical equation that says that life will constantly deteriorate. You'll never break a glass and it will unbreak. Will never unbreak. So when something is broken, it will continue to be broken, or it will break further. Even though mathematically there is a possibility that it actually gets together again and forms a glass, it's a tiny, tiny, probability that it doesn't ever happen really. And so an understanding, a true understanding of life and the way life operates is all around entropy. It's all around everything. If I leave a plant unhedged, uncut, it will run out of control. If we leave the trains to run around without us interfering, it will run out of control. But then the questions of physics start to go further when you think about butterfly effects and black swans, which is what we're suffering here, right? Eventually, one of every millions and millions of iterations of life, one of them will go out of control. I mean, I don't know if listeners are aware of this, but there are 1.5 million viruses in animals that are unknown to humans. We have no cure for them. We have no idea how to deal with them if they transfer from an animal to a human, right? 1.5 million is a very large number for a possibility of one of them every few years to break out, right? And the reality is, eventually when we put our effort to control something, it works, right? So the reality is we have eradicated smallpox, right? But that attempt is an attempt to keep the pendulum, if you want, to exert effort to keep things a little bit off their balance. But if you take the normal balance of life, life has zero control. Every event of your life. Yeah.
So how do we as individuals, that's a superb analysis, not terribly reassuring perhaps for people out there who have been furloughed, people who've been laid off, people who don't know if they can pay their rent. In many senses, the economic alarm that this has generated is far greater than the public health alarm. And my question to you is, how do we taking into account this idea of lack of control, but also this idea that we do have to control our income somehow, our getting food on the table. How do we go about addressing lack of control and remaining sort of reassured about our lives?
I love this question. I think the idea is to understand that while we do not control the outcomes of everything, because the reality of life is that your fate, if you want, the way things happen, is the result of your own free will, the free will of others, and the free will of the universe itself, right? So you and I planned to have this conversation, right? My free will is to show up on time, but if your free will was, no, I'm not interested, let's cancel it, right? It would have not happened. Thank you. And if the free will of the universe is that one of us may have caught the virus and is now bedbound, then it wouldn't have happened. Now, an understanding of that reality does not deny the reality that we have our free will. You and I, we control two things and two things only. Okay, we control our actions and our attitude. And by controlling your action and attitude, you suddenly start to go through life a lot better off than if you don't. Now, this is a relative improvement. The ambition or the dream that we can actually change life and control it, good luck, right? That's not the way the game is played. It's almost like getting into a squash court and attempting to convince everyone to play pool. That's not the way it is, huh? This is a squash court. You might as well get on your toes and get excited and, try to hit every ball. Now, if you think about it that way, then by controlling your actions and controlling your attitude, you can improve your odds. So let's take examples, huh? The reality here is we've all lost jobs. Many of us know someone who've lost a job and, lost a source of income completely. We know someone whose business has shut down. But the truth is, for every single one of us, there has been some kind of a loss, right? I tend to be a speaker. Sometimes I traveled around the world. I get income from that. That's gone. I engage in certain work around board memberships and consultancies and so on. This is not happening for a very long time to come, and so on and so forth. Some of my businesses that I started in my life are shutting down and they're losing money and they're bleeding. It's the truth. Now, how do I react to that? That's action and control, an attitude. The first is a choice of an attitude. And an attitude really is the game changer. It's to say to myself, am I going to be the victim and sit down here and just wait for life to crush me? Or am I actually going to step up and say, like every other harshness that I ever went through in life, I'm still here. I managed to survive. I can get up. And I can do something about it, whether that thing is to control my expenses, maybe reach out to someone, maybe apply for another job, maybe do this, maybe do that. I don't know, right? And for some of us, I understand it's very difficult and it can get really, really to rock bottom. But for most of us, it isn't. For most of us, it's, you know what? I wish I had that job a little longer. Okay. I ask people quite often when they say, I have personal friends that lost jobs, huh? And I ask them and I say, so are you going to be in trouble? And they said, no, for the next 3 to 4 months, I'm okay. Right? That's great, right? That's if you're okay for the next 3 to 4 months, as a matter of fact, if you're okay for tonight, you're better off than someone in the slums of India or someone, who's running around in the streets of Syria or, there are many others who are not okay for tonight. And again, I had a story of one of my dear friends from Poland who was stuck here and literally thrown out of a hotel at 11 o'clock at night, right? Literally because it was lockdown time and the hotel decided to shut down. Now, when those things happen, you learn to tell yourself, the only thing I can do is to understand the situation, acknowledge the challenge, change my attitude to positive, and then start to take the actions that will take me where I need to go. Now, I spoke about this a little too long, but I'll give 2 quick examples. Two of my favorite movies is Forrest Gump and Apollo 13. Okay. And between Tom Hanks in Forrest Gump, who flows with life as life takes him wherever it wants to take him, eventually ending up with a rich, very, very rich in experience, rich in fortune life. That's one attitude where we stop resisting life as it goes out of control and we flow with it. The other is Apollo 13, where he plays the role of the captain of the mission that basically goes wrong in the middle of space. And you could see Tom Hanks in that memorable moment come to the microphone and say, "Houston, we have a problem." It's almost like he has a flat tire sort of thing, right? And the idea of Houston, we have a problem is not saying that this is a little thing, this is a big problem. But I'm going to tackle it with the attitude of this is a problem. I'm going to do the steps that I can to get out of it and come back to Earth safe, right? Because the only certainty I have is if I don't take that attitude and if I don't do those actions, I'm not going to come back to Earth safe. So that's that relative gain is what we should aim for.
So to digest what you've been saying, do you think that, you seem to be saying, crudely, we need to be grateful for what we have and what we can do and ignore what we don't have and what we can't do. So with that in mind, do you think it's a good thing that this happened now and not, say, 30 years ago? I mean, lockdown and the shutting down of economies and jobs would have looked very different a generation or so ago. What do you think to that?
It would have been different. It would have been differently difficult. It is not easy. So understand, we have this incredible technology for you and I to connect and for me to make sure that my mom's okay. And, it's wonderful. It's amazing. Huh? But we also have become so addicted before this to certain habits that when those habits are taken away, it's so difficult. So, you know me, Mark. So I'm the ultimate introvert, even though I don't come across as an introvert at all. You could probably keep me in a small place for 6.5 years and I'll be very grateful. Okay. And then, it is how I am. And by the way, there are many of us because I am a trained extrovert. I truly enjoy being with humans, but I get my energy from reflection and spending time, in silence and so on. Our world has been extroverted by design over the last few years. And so we have that incredible impatience around, I need to be out of my home. I need to go out for a coffee. I need to, to meet people. I need to socialize and sort of almost numb my brain in a way that doesn't allow me to realize the challenges that I'm facing at work or in my relationship or whatever that is. It's easier to just constantly be entertained and engaged. Now, the lockdown tells us, hey, stop, right? You need to sit down, and sometimes it's difficult. You need to sit down sometimes with, in a small room, a single bedroom apartment with a partner that you were thinking of breaking up with. Like, that's horrible, right? Yeah. And so it is that idea of how it is difficult now differently than it would have been difficult 30 years ago, right? And at the same on the same theme, if you want, it's difficult for you differently than it is difficult for me, differently than it is difficult for someone who's just lost their job. Okay. I think the truth, however, is that it's equally difficult if you look at it from within us. Okay. So you may think that you're the one that is having this the most difficult way ever because you're locked down and you can no longer have your coffee, or because you have this annoying person next to you, or because, you lost your job. And you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, the way the game of life is played is it sends you the exact test that you need to develop a little bit to be qualified to meet. Okay. If you were qualified to meet it, you wouldn't get the test. That's so interesting. Huh? So the game is, if you're not a very good shooter of a pistol in a video game, okay, all of the enemies that will show up will require that pistol. And if you try to avoid it by running away, it's not going to work. You have to sit as a gamer, you have to take yourself and say, okay, it's time to learn to use the pistol. Okay. Now, and I'm going to say this in a very blunt way, huh? You know, people will say if you have money in this time, you're better off than if you don't. No, you're equally bad. Those who have money are losing massive amounts of money, okay, and are literally working 25 hours trying to keep things afloat. I know people who went completely bankrupt, okay, from wealth and money to an investment in oil to poof, nothing, right? And that contrast was the test they needed, right? I know others who have money but don't know how to cook, okay? And to them, the horrendous work of their hands every evening is the test they have to face, okay?
And that
And I
plays
don't
into
yeah.
into your theory. One thing that I really took away from your book and from the interview that you did with Elizabeth Day on that fantastic podcast, How to Fail, was this notion that sort of in each of us, happiness is it can be almost boiled down to an equation, right? About
Totally.
whether you're rich or poor, happiness is still attainable, but it all depends on your expectations. Perhaps you could explain that equation a little bit before we start to take some questions from our audience.
Yeah, to me, it's very straightforward. Rain has never had any intrinsic value of happiness. Sunshine has never had any intrinsic value of happiness, unless sunshine is what you want in your life. Okay, so if we have sunshine outside and we're locked indoors, we start to dislike the fact that there is sunshine outside. Okay, if there is, if you're a farmer and you want to water your plants, you love rain. Okay, but if you want to sunbathe and you're in Ibiza somewhere, and it rains, you're like very disappointed. Now, if you just look at every moment in your life where you've ever felt unhappy, you didn't feel unhappy because of what life gave you. You felt unhappy because of a comparison between what life gave you and what you wanted life to give you. Okay, so if you're given a wonderful partner who's tall and handsome and kind and loving and and caring and but he has 4 hairs in his ear, and you're just focused on the 4 hairs saying life is so unfair to me, I don't deserve the 4 hairs, okay, then you're going to be unhappy. Put that in an equation. Your happiness is equal to or greater than the difference between the events of your life and your expectations of how life should be. Okay, now we perform this all the time, and unfortunately the trick of life is that the more life gives us, the more our expectations grow, okay? And the more the events that wouldn't bother anyone who doesn't have what we have make us unhappy, okay? So and I say this with a ton of respect, huh? I grew up in the Middle East. I got stuck here in London for the lockdown, and I love it, and I'm very grateful that you guys are hosting me. But that reality is, in where I come from in the world, our expectations are very different. If people, many people, billions of people around the world, they expect 1 meal a day. If they got a meal a day, then that is a celebration. It's an amazing day. Okay, they don't expect to be going to a pub in the evening. They don't expect to go out and watch a movie. They don't expect to have a wonderful partner in their life that will take care of them. They don't expect those things. And so they become much happier with life, believe it or not, than us in the Western world. Okay? Why? Because their balance of every event in their life to them is a novelty. It's like, oh my God, look at that. I can breathe today. And suddenly it's like, it's amazing. If you're living in Beijing or you're living in Mumbai, right? Suddenly you go like, oh, it's a clear day where I can breathe. That's fantastic. Life is amazing for me. We, on the other hand, we start to take things like, okay, there is an outbreak of a virus, and I have to be at home for 6 weeks. Like, what happened to my individual freedom? What is the government doing to me here? What individual freedom? Like, seriously, this is something that requires all of us to behave differently and to look at the world differently. And I think if we fix the balance between the events of life and how our expectations should be, we would be happier a lot more often.
So to sum it up, happiness equals reality divided by expectation?
Reality minus perception of reality minus expectation.
Minus expectation.
perception of reality, because we don't always see reality for what it is. Remember that. Sometimes our brains deceive us. Sometimes, the negativity from our friends, social media, the media, and so on, they would make reality appear to be a little worse than what it actually is.
Right. I want to sort of go off at a tangent here just to bring in a couple of the questions that people have sent to us before the event started. Asya Kremneva asks you, Mo, do you think the world and our everyday life after lockdown will be very different from the life before?
I wish it would be different than the life before. I really wish it would. I think it will be for a short while and then it will bounce back. I'm not a futurist, so this is not my work to do. But, I have found massive amounts of blessings in what we are going through. Okay. So one of the things I did during the lockdown is I started a podcast around the silver linings, literally just talking about the silver linings of this. And I get guests that talk about incredible insights of, spending time with family, traveling less, the stuff that you covered, the idea that the environment is responding very positively. And the question is, will we keep those? Will we continue to do our 1 hour of exercise every day? Will we continue to spend time with our children? Will we say no to traveling like maniacs around the world? My intention is I will try my absolute best, right? And I hope that's the intention of everyone. The trick, however, is that my belief is that very quickly the economic pressures, the need for oil to go back to where it was, the need for airlines to continue to make money, the needs for this and that will probably itch us back to where we would be, and we may forget. And I think an amazing thing that the media can help us do is help us not forget. Help us not forget that the world we have now has its downside, but there are many found upsides. And if we can just lose the downside and keep the upsides, life would be a lot better for all of us.
So as we entered the Q&A phase, just let me remind you that you can use the Q&A function on the right-hand side of the app. Do get your questions coming in. We've got plenty already to be getting on with, but we'd love to hear from you. You touched just there on sort of truth and upside and downside in what we perceive in the world, and I just wonder what you think about how the news media have covered COVID-19. We may not completely agree on this, but I do think it's important that
I don't think we will.
that we get your take on. How often do you read the news? How often do you watch the news through this?
Since the beginning of the epidemic, not a single time, not once. I have not a single time switched on the news, and I respect the work that you guys are doing, massively. But so again, on Slow Mo, my podcast, I hosted a person that said a massive gold nugget. She said, I schedule my anxiety. And I said, right. What do you mean, Karen? And I said, what do you mean, Karen? And she said, I allow myself to be anxious by watching all of the news that I need to watch only between 2 and 2:30 p.m. Okay. Right. And then, of course, in my response, I basically schedule my anxiety between 2 and 2:02 p.m. Once a month. Okay. And the truth is this. The truth is that the nature of media in general is very, very, very tied to our human nature, which is we want to be safe. So we have that survival need in us, which basically means we need to know about what is wrong more than we need to know about what is right. I always give the example of if a tiger shows up right in front of me, my brain will not tell me, oh my God, look at how beautiful the pattern on that animal is. My brain will tell me, you're going to die, run away, right? And so I think like everything we've done with technology in the 20th and 21st century, we ended up exaggerating that need to the point where the majority of the reporting is negative, right? Human nature responds to it very nicely because, you want to know about the negative. But the truth is, life is not that negative. The truth is, 60 to 70% of the thoughts in an adult brain are negative, while 60 to 70% of your life could not be negative. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here, right? And so to be able to take charge and say, I will click on a WhatsApp message that comes from my friend that says, this is important for you to know. Or I will, in a phone conversation, ask and say, is the lockdown nearing its end, and so on and so forth. But I don't have to spend hours and hours and hours thinking about the things that I cannot influence, that I know will affect me negatively. And let me just qualify this very importantly. There are missions in life that I champion. Okay, I champion happiness, I champion compassion, I champion the environment. These are topics that are important to me. So I do spend significant amount of time learning about those, catching the news about those, engaging around those, because I know that with my current position in life, I can actually make a difference. Right? But there are other topics, democracy, for example, that I don't, I can't cover everything. I can't be an Italian chef and a Chinese chef and an Indian chef. And I just can be a few things that I'm passionate about. And my choice has always been, if I cannot make a difference to my life, to people I love, or to the community at large, why do I need that news at all? Why do I need to know what debate is happening inside the government organization around when the lockdown is going to end if I cannot influence it? Okay? And don't lie to yourself. Democracy will not allow you to influence it. The truth is, when the government decides, you're going to be allowed out. When the government decides, you're going to be informed. So why waste the time between now and then engaging in that conversation?
Well, I would, at this point, have to push back and say I, of course, think it's imperative that our audiences, that our public is extremely well informed, and that our media does cover the things that government is doing wrong and keeping pressure on government in order to improve their game. But I think that you would expect me to say that. Let me bring in one of our questioners here. Dina Morgan has asked, how could we get more media to be on the side of positive change when negative news is the thing that people instinctively click on?
Yeah, do what I have done. I probably this is not the right place to say this, but the truth is the media is cleverly responding to your actions. Okay, so I have stopped watching horror movies something like 20 years ago. I've stopped watching violent movies something like 11 years ago. If all of us stopped watching violent movies, Hollywood will make more comedies. Hollywood is not making violent movies because they just like it. They make violent movies because they're box office hits. Right? And so if you as an individual decide not to waste your life on social media, liking people who are pausing to make it look like they're amazing and their life is amazing, people will stop doing that. We're teaching people to do this by liking it. Now, you may think, and it's interesting because we started by saying we don't have control, okay? But we do have control over our individual actions. And if I choose in my actions to not watch negative news, okay, one of two things will happen. Both of them, one of them will certainly happen, which is I will not be watching negative news. That's great news for me, okay? And the second is if enough of us take that action, someone in one of the news media agencies will say, maybe we should give them more good news, right?
Yeah. I want to go back to that idea of control, because one of our questioners, someone called Zed, sort of curious name, regarding controlling actions and attitude in order to improve outcomes, is there also a time for anger and outrage?
Great question. That's one of my favorite questions, as a matter of fact. If you look at the happiness equation, the answer is yes, by the way. There is time for anger, time for outrage, time for sadness, time for worry, for fear. These are instinctive survival mechanisms. If you look at the happiness equation is simply a survival machine. It's your brain looking at the world around it and saying, this event is not optimum. It's not the optimal state for my survival. It doesn't meet my expectations. It worries me. Okay, the 4 hairs in my boyfriend's ear are basically an indication that he doesn't groom for me, which are an indication that he doesn't love me, which is an indication that he will leave me, and which is an indication that I will either have to go back to a dating site or spend the rest of my life alone, right? And that complexity in our brain gets us to position those little things as bigger than what they really are, but they are important. So there is no one on earth that doesn't suffer sadness, that doesn't suffer anxiety, that doesn't suffer fear. It is just instinctively, the equation is telling you something's wrong, do something about it. The trick is two things. One is, what good is anger doing for you, and what bad is it doing for you? So to acknowledge the emotion of anger is something. To act upon it is something else. To acknowledge the emotion of sadness is something, and to lock yourself down in a room and cry about it for 27 years is another thing, right? So let me use a sad but very relevant example to me. I lost my son because of a human error. Okay, I took him to a very simple surgical operation at his prime, tall, handsome, beautiful in every way, the pride of a parent. 4 hours later, 5 mistakes by the surgeon, my son was gone. Now, if you think that I am an iceberg, or His Holiness the Dalai Lama, by the way, even His Holiness gets sad. Huh? The biggest happiness practitioners get sad. Huh? If you think of me as an iceberg, that I'm not going to break down and cry, that's stupid, right? I do break down and cry, but then there is that moment where I ask myself and say, okay, if I close myself in a room, like lock myself in a room and hit my head against the wall for 27 years crying about Ali, would it bring Ali back? Okay? And if it isn't going to bring Ali back, why am I doing this? Okay? If I suffer a reason for outrage and anger, that basically is a human response that says what is ahead of me is a threat to my identity, to my value system, to my physical form, that is so high that I will hiss like a cat to scare the threat away. That's what anger is. But then, so you feel it. It's very instinctive. But then you ask yourself, what good will that do for me? It will drain my energy afterwards. It will break my relationships. It will position me in a place in society where I am seen as an uncontrollable, complaining, destructive person. Is there a different way I can channel that anger to something that actually works? Right. So for me, it's not that I don't deny this. Ali left 6 years ago. Actually, 2 days ago was his 6th years anniversary in Islamic calendar. And I wake up 3-4 times a week. It hurts. It hurts to lose a child. Now, I wake up and I feel that feeling. And instead of just sitting down to, today we're just gonna be in depression, I tell myself, okay, it's time to make 1,000 people happy. It's time to make 1,000 people remember my son and how wonderful he was. It's the mission I chose in life. I turn that energy of sadness into something that's good. So it's not the emotion. Everyone will get the emotion. It's the action that you need to control.
There's a good follow-up question here from one of our audience called Sophie. She says, your work draws on Buddhism, Stoicism, mindfulness, and other belief systems that are more traditionally associated with Eastern cultures. And it can feel as though we in the West have a lot of trouble when it comes to thinking about and making peace with death. What are the best ways we can adapt culturally?
These are two questions. So one is, yes, my work draws on Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, Sufism, Islam, Christianity, Judaism. I've studied every single one of them. I think they're messed up in many ways, but I think there's a beautiful core in every one of them. And if you actually find that beautiful core from each and combine them into what I call the fruit salad of spirituality, you would get a very, very, very wholesome meal. So yes, but my work also draws on physics and mathematics and cosmology quite heavily. It draws specifically on the theory of relativity very, very heavily. And I think the reality is that these are not separate at all. The reality is that the truth is multi-angled and it's so multifaceted. And for you, no, I don't claim to know the truth at all, but I claim to be a seeker of the truth. And the way to do that is to seek from all angles. The death specifically was the most difficult chapter in my book, because I was writing it around 40 days after my son died, and I needed to write it, in a way that wasn't. I was writing about happiness, so I needed to write it in a way that was actually objective. And the truth about death has very little to do with spirituality. Okay, the truth about death is anchored in science, and the truth about death. I don't want to bring in too complex views of this, but if you understand Big Bang theory and quantum physics enough, you would realize that life is not the opposite of death. Life is the opposite of birth. Okay, because for our universe to exist, it needed to be observed by a form of life. Okay, and so all of the physics that we know from the beginning of the Big Bang theory, if you apply the uncertainty principle, or the Heisenberg interpretation and so on of quantum physics, you basically want to understand that we could not exist as physical forms if life didn't exist before the physical form existed. Okay, so death is not the opposite of life. Death is the opposite of birth. Just like in a video game, you come to this level of the game through the portal that's known as birth, and you leave that level of the video game through the portal that's called death. But life existed before, during, and after. Now, that's one thing to understand. The other thing to understand is, if with a simple understanding of the theory of relativity, where all of time exists in a space-time continuum, where all of time already happened, which is undeniable by our understanding of science, you would then have to question who died first, me or Ali, or who was born first, me or Ali, because the question of first is a question that assumes the presence of time. And when you see it that way, you would realize that what died first is a property of the physical. What died first is the physical property of Ali, which is Ali's existence in a physical form, okay, that complies with the physical properties of time. But the essence of Ali, which resides outside space-time, is like the essence of me, still continuing. That has nothing to do with spirituality. Okay. Now, if you want to take that and take it into spirituality, you will find an understanding of death everywhere, other than in the Western cultures that completely assumes that death is the start of a new life. It's like 7 billion people on the planet, 6 billion of them completely believe that, yeah, we die. It's just a normal cycle. It's just like, you end the level, you play, and the next level, life is like that, right? There are a few, however, that just hang on to this one so much that it becomes difficult, because this one is not hangable onto. The nature of it is that it ends.
A slight pivot in a different direction to a question here from Alejandro Navarro, but it's equally philosophical. Should happiness be the ultimate goal of our life?
It's not the ultimate goal. It's the ultimate operating mode. Okay, so think of it this way. Huh? The reason why we're all worried about COVID-19 is because if we catch a virus, we are not in the ultimate form that allows us to perform and survive in life. Okay, so let's take a simpler virus that we understand. If you catch the flu, you immediately go like sore throat and my ears are all right. I'm a bit feverish. Okay, I'm going to have honey and ginger and lemon. I might actually go to Boots and buy something. I'm going to do something about it. Why? Because you're not supposed to be unhealthy. Healthy is the default setting for you in which you perform best. Similarly, happy is the default setting for you in which you perform best. But happy, as defined by the happiness equation, happy is not jumping up and down in a party and drinking and having fun. Happy is events meeting expectations. It's that peace and calm that you feel in you when you're okay with life as it is. That doesn't mean you don't want to change life. You could want to change life, make it better, make it more fair, make it more progressive, whatever it is that you believe in. But you do that from a place where you feel okay with life as it is. Now ask yourself, if you went to work one morning and you felt okay with work, would you not perform better? right? If you were having a relationship with a loved one and you were content about the state of where the relationship is, and there came a topic of argument, would you not argue, discuss it in a better way? Would that not make the relationship better? Happiness, that calm and peace, allows us to be better in life. So just like health, like when you react to catching the flu by taking a paracetamol, when you're unhappy, you should react by trying to return back to that state of happiness, because it's your ultimate form for survival. It's your ultimate form for performance. And it's, believe it or not, unlike what they convince us in the modern world, it's your ultimate form for success. If you're happier, you're likely to be more successful. Studies will show 12% more likely. So happy people are by definition 12% more productive at their work than those who are not.
There's a couple of questions along this theme. The best one, or at least perhaps the most succinct, shall we say, from Gwendolyn Burks, who says, you assume equality of hardship in your helpful analysis. What about people suffering exceptional hardship? That is different.
Yeah.
And I think the idea here is that these theories about sorts of happiness and tranquility and being at one with the present moment become very much harder to deal with when you're suffering from exceptional hardship.
I never managed to figure that one out, to be honest, and I'll say that openly. It is, sometimes you see people who are suffering so much and you go like, I can't even believe how they continue through life, right? And that to me mostly is the suffering of the mind, if you want, which I think I can manage and I can handle, and I think it's up to us to change. But there are people who are suffering chronic pain, for example. I mean, it's like, how can you bear that? Now, with my work on happiness, however, I ended up, and I don't understand how, to be honest, finding that those people are equally as happy or even happier than those who are not. Okay, in many circumstances, cancer survivors are happier than those who have never suffered cancer. Okay? Suffering somehow puts things in perspective. Okay, I had a friend of mine who was the kind of debate junkie. He would constantly try to prove himself right. And then he was diagnosed, and he was an active, aggressive businessman. And then he was diagnosed with a very rare disease that got him bedbound. And he, I visited him very frequently. And one day he looked at me and he said, "You know what, Mo? All I want is to be able to turn to my side without feeling pain." Okay? All else that I was killing myself about, what my girlfriend did, the money I lost in the deal, the customer that's annoying me, the traffic jams, all of this just vanished from me forever. All I need is to be able to turn on my side without the pain. And so somehow it seems to us that, again, I don't say there is an equality of harshness, but I say what the Islamic culture teaches us, for example, is that harshness comes with the exact magnitude that matches your capability to bear. Okay? So I would tend to believe that people who are very advanced in their spirituality and their self-love and their self-connection somehow end up getting tests that appear to the rest of us to be more difficult, but for them, it's quite manageable. Okay? Because just like you go to the gym and I cannot lift 120 kilograms in bench press, someone who's been training all their life to bench press would think of 120 kilograms as like, yeah, that's another day at work.
We've got time probably for one more question. An intriguing one here from Luana. It says, can love enter?
Okay, I don't know if we lost you, Mark, or you guys lost me.
As a constant. Yikes.
Okay, so Mark, I lost you for a minute. I heard you say the most important question, can love, and then I didn't hear anything else.
It blew the network. It was such a great question. Luana says, can love enter as a constant in the happiness equation? I think this is so because with love, there can be no realistic expectation.
Oh, I love that question. Oh my God. So I wrote in Solve for Happy chapter 12 was what I called my unscientific chapter, okay, which was love is all you need, right? And I think what is so intriguing is, as you can see, I'm a very deep analytical thinker in many ways. The only thing that I could never associate equations with is unconditional love. Remember, there are two types of love. There is the love that's being sold as a product in our modern world. This is, I love you because, or I love this thing because, right? There is a reason for that love. So, you make me happy, so I love you, or you're so beautiful, so I love you, and so on, is conditional love, and it fades away when the conditions go away, and it leads to unhappiness, okay? Unconditional love is, I just love you. I don't understand. I love butterflies is the example I normally use. I have no idea why. I don't even need to see them to love them. I just feel an overwhelming love for that thing, right? I love my son Ali, even though he's no longer there. And that, unfortunately, in my analysis, has nothing to do with the equation. That is the underlying foundation below the equation. Okay, if you manage to reach unconditional love, you can never be unhappy because there are no conditions in unconditional love. You don't feel the joy of love when it's given to you. You feel it when you give it. That's unconditional love. Okay, the joy of it is, oh my God, I love everything. And I know it sounds really weird with a man with a beard and a Middle Eastern, demeanor and a scientific brain and mathematics, but damn, I love everything on the planet. It's really weird. And I have that side to me that, stops next to a little squirrel in the park and I'm go like, hey, little guy, let's chat, right? And I absolutely freaking love everything, including the people that were harsh to me, which is really weird, okay? But it gives me such power, because truly and honestly, no one can betray my trust, because I see that below our egos, we're all so lovable, we're all so cute, okay? We're all so incredibly admirable.
That does seem to be a fantastic place to leave off, a very upsidey kind of notion to finish with. So I just want to say thank you, Mo, and thank you to everyone out there for joining us today. I hope you found this informative and that at least some of your questions were answered. We're hoping this will be the first of many live stream Guardian events through the coming weeks and months. And so we're going to send a very short survey to participants just to ask what you thought, what you liked and what you didn't. And if you could let us have those, then that will really help us shape the programme through the summer months when hopefully we will start to emerge from lockdown. Just the other things to say, do keep following the Upside series. The best way to do this would be to sign up to the weekly newsletter. If you Google Guardian Upside newsletter, it'll be the first thing that you find. And the sign up process is very easy and you'll hear from us once a week. If you feel even more committed to The Guardian and you really love what we do and you value it, then I'd also urge you to join us as a member or supporter, whatever you can afford. Again, just a simple search for Guardian Contribute will take you through to a place where you can very simply join us at this very critical time for our business and for news media around the world in general. Well, that's about all we have time for. We finished bang on 2 o'clock and virtually all of you have stayed till the end. So thanks very much for that. Do stay safe, stay well, look after yourselves, and I really look forward to seeing you all again on another occasion in the very near future. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mo.
Thank you so much for having me.